I went to Vietnam in 1968 and 69, but I joined in 1966 and I stayed into 1972. I decided to go into nursing probably because my mother was a nurse and I admired her. She was a registered nurse. I grew up on a dairy farm, so my dad is out milking cows. My mom puts on her pretty white uniform and goes to the hospital and does her nursing, and I admired her so much. And I think just who I am, my personality, I just wanted to be a nurse too. And it was the 60s. I started in 64. My two older brothers are now in the Army. It's the Vietnam War. One brother's drafted. I'm studying nursing. I'm watching the 6 o'clock news, and I'm seeing Walter Cronkite, and I'm watching body bags on the ground in Southeast Asia. I'm seeing helicopters flying overhead, and I'm looking really hard when I see footage. I'm looking for those nurses. There must be nurses. I never saw one. But I had something burning inside of me. And in Minneapolis, where I was in college, I walked 12 blocks to where I found an Army recruiting center, and I said, do nurses go to Vietnam? And she said, yes, and there's a shortage. So long story short, I signed on the dotted line, and a year later I was there. So in the Army Nurse Corps, we would have assignments based on our skills, and some nurses were assigned medical, some were assigned surgical, so on. OB, what have you. I chose surgical. I loved intensive care, and I was also in the burn unit when I served in Vietnam. So I was a combat nurse, a trauma nurse when I was in Vietnam, and a head nurse at Pleiku. And that meant that in any given ward, one of my units had 66 beds, and every bed was full. When you're young, you're scared because you don't have the skills that give you confidence. But, like I said, when you are put into a unit and there's 66 beds and you have to start 66 IVs, you get good the first day, basically. It didn't take us long to become skilled, and that was helpful. Then we developed confidence. We also started to forget about ourselves and our own fears and our own worries and be physically upset when we saw something horrific. For me personally, the physical aspect didn't bother me. Nothing really repulsed me. It was watching so many young men having pain. I hated that they were in pain. And back then we didn't have patient-controlled analgesia. We had morphine and Demerol, and it waxed and it waned. You gave the Demerol, they passed out, and in an hour they were screaming for more pain medication. So the difficulty was watching so many young men suffer and not be able to help them in the way you would like to. One of the hardest things for us nurses was we'd get wounds of every kind, and some were minor. So they would come in. They didn't get the $1 million wound, which meant they went home. And we would fix them up, patch them up, we used to say, send them back, and then we knew they were going back to get wounded again. Well, this one young man who had a minor wound, he was from Minnesota, I was from Minnesota, Eddie Lee Evanson, just a darling young boy, 19, nothing romantic between us whatsoever, but he was always wanting to help. So I said, well, Eddie, carry the bedpans, help these, ambulate the patients outside to the latrine. He was bored. He was recovering. So he said, well, ma'am, I got my orders. I'm leaving today. He was going back to the field, and he said, would you write to me? I said, sure. He gave me his address. I wrote to him. Never heard back. I never thought about it. Then I was transferred up to Pleiku, different hospital. And one day at work, the delivery came, and it was a yellow envelope, and it had a little string on it, like the military used, and it had my name on it. And I untied this. I took it back to my room. I untied that string. I still remember this. And I opened it, and my letters were in there. And the commanding officer said, I'm sorry, Lieutenant Carlson, Corporal Evanson never received your letters. He was killed in action. And when I came out here in 1982, it was to find Eddie's name. But he was one of those young men that we sent back, and he didn't make it the second time. I would say every day was rewarding because at the end of the day I would go home exhausted, and I knew I'd done my best. And I'd worked hard to bring comfort and, like I said, making just that constant assessment of seeing, is that patient in pain? Sometimes they were so almost comatose or, in shock and out of it. They couldn't tell you how they felt. You had to make your own observation, your own assessment based on pulse, respiration, blood pressure, that kind of thing. And just staying on top of keeping them comfortable so that they wouldn't be in pain. So it was about how quick we were, how brave we were, how smart we were. We had to be smart, we had to be brave, and we had to be quick. We didn't think about that, but that was part of our day. And the worry that if someone died on our watch, it would be our fault. Every day was surreal. Every day was a different day. Every day was surreal. Some days were like a hallucination, especially at night. The worst things happened at night. The patients, there was a lot of fear at night because it seemed like Charlie, when they were going to rocket and mortar and attack us, it was at night. I used to say everything bad happened at night. And when I came home from Vietnam, I wondered why I couldn't sleep at night, but I was just waiting for something bad to happen. So I just had sleepless nights, just waiting to have to roll under my bed if there was a rocket coming in, or there's things that don't leave you after you leave the war zone. You leave the war zone behind you, but it still goes home with you. Well, I've been coming here since '82, and for me, because I'm the founder of the Vietnam Women's Memorial, the greatest joy for me, it's just pure joy, is seeing these other women and how much the memorial means to them, because that's what it was for. It was for them. It was to help them heal. It was to bring us together. They're more emotional. They're more willing to, I think, share their stories, open up, but they come up to me and say, "Thank you. I didn't know I needed this memorial, and now I know I needed it." So when I see the tears and the joy and the happiness of the Red Cross women, the journalists, all the women, not just the nurses, saying thank you for this memorial, I did what I set out to do. And it was hard work. It was 10 years. It wasn't easy. But I look back and I say now, it was worth it. We were worth it. They were worth it. They deserve this.